We are being recorded, and this will be kept as on connection for further listeners to have access to your lecture in the pages of the University of São Paulo Law School, and also on the initiative of the Common Forum on Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity of the University of São Paulo, which shares activities from the law school, the International Relations Institute, and the Faculty of History in the University of São Paulo. So this is a joint initiative of 3 units of the University of São Paulo. So your lectures will be kept in both pages of the university. So thank you very much again, Professor Olio, Professor Maxim, and you have the floor. You can please share your knowledge and information with us. I would just move around the camera so that you have a view of those present in this session in our room today. And we will have also the online participants as well. Please, you have
the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for interest in the very important issue nowadays that influences the issue of the whole security of the planet, and which refers to the destruction of environment in Ukraine during this violent war, a full-fledged war that started into almost 2 years ago. My name is Olia, and I am representing International Environmental Organization, which is based in Ukraine, in Lviv, and our organization has been doing lots of legal work to protect our environment. Great. So after the war started, we had been witnessing the destruction of the environment in Ukraine. Probably you have seen in the mass media that during these 2 years of the war in Ukraine, there are around 71,000 of military vehicles left as equipment somewhere in the fields, in the battlefields. Near 28 military boats were sank in the Black Sea. Near 700 aircrafts were destroyed and became a military waste. Near 150,000 square kilometers of the territory is mined and dangerous for people. 60,000 hectares of forests were destroyed and totally burned. So these are the preliminary and some results of the Russian aggression to Ukraine. So that now the environment is a silent victim of this. There is a lot of things we will do after the war, after we will receive a victory, like cleaning this military waste, doing deforestation, and many other things. But at the moment, we need to document and to collect the evidence of such terrible destruction of the Ukrainian environment during these hostilities, terrible pollution of air by burns and heavy military activities, pollution of soils, pollution of water, destruction of forest, and numerous protected areas were destructed. So the damage is huge, and sometimes it's even very difficult to calculate this damage and to collect the evidence. But we are here, and as a member of the public, we want to bring this issue of the damage to the environment and the issue of commission of ecocide by the aggressor, because at the moment the main focus is actually and naturally is the damage to property, damage to human lives, and many other things, because the war is still ongoing, and more things are happening, like the destruction of the children hospital in Kiev a week ago, which was terrible. And I think mass media all over the world showed this terrible shots from the place where the main children's hospital was affected, and children were affected as well by the aggressor, by the rocket missile. So what we did from our side, and what we want to show to you, is our legal battle, because we are the lawyers, and we are trying to communicate, to make synergies with the law enforcement bodies, with bodies of state environmental inspection, with the Ministry of Environment, in order to facilitate the process of collection of damage, collection of evidence of the damage done to the natural resources, in order to be able to bring the aggressor to responsibility, either on the national level, or on the national level, or even at both levels. So here we will also present some results and some studies, and our participation in this event of myself and Mr. Maxim from the prosecution office is the evidence that public and state enforcement bodies, law enforcement bodies, are working in a close cooperation in order to better evaluate the damage done to environment, and to bring good cases, and to create precedents on national and on international level. So I want to give you a few slides about the criminal legal regime of Ukraine, as we are the country which has ecocide in our criminal code, and we will focus today on the ecocide in our discussion, which is really very interesting, very important topic, not only in the war time, but also in a peaceful times. So we have the very old and quite obsolete definition of ecocide as the crime in our criminal code of Ukraine. And you can see from my slide that the definition is very general, as ecocide is a massive destruction of flora and fauna, poisoning of the atmosphere or water resources, as well as commitment of other actions that may cause ecological disaster. So those activities are punishable by imprisonment. So you can see that this definition, actually this crime was not very popular, as we can say this, before the war. So there were almost no cases, no sentences for the crime of the ecocide. And you can see from this definition, I will explain also why this crime was not very popular. Not because it wasn't committed in Ukraine before the war, but because of the some shortcomings in the definition of this crime in the criminal code of Ukraine. So one of the big problem is that there are value concepts in this definition of the ecocides, which are difficult to evaluate and to apply. For instance, what is massive destruction of flora or massive destruction of fauna? What is massive? There is no definition in the legislation of this term. There was no court practice on this at all. Also, what is poisoning of atmosphere? We have like pollution of the atmosphere, we have pollution of water resources, but what is poisoning? There is also no definition what kind of activities we can name as poisoning. And also we have the term ecological disaster, which is not explained in the legislation. This is almost the only one place in the legislation, in the criminal code, which mentioned this term ecological disaster. So we we also don't have a definition what this ecological disaster does. We cannot. It's very difficult to name some activities that they will create or they created ecological disaster. So because of this vague and unclear terms used in the article ecocide, it was quite complicated to do prosecution on this article. There is also usually in the crimes against environment, there are also problems associated with collection of evidence, securing of evidence, analysis of scientific evidence, and financing of sampling and analysis, because in order to prove the ecocide you need to collect to take samples of water, air, soil, to do this quite quickly, to see the whether it's a long-term or short-term consequence, in order to be able to name these activities as the ecocide or criminalize these activities as ecocide. So these are main difficulties, but I'm sure also my colleague Maxim will later explain what kind of difficulties General Prosecution Office is facing in nowadays during wartime in the collection of evidence of destruction of environment during criminal investigation of criminal cases like this. So there is also in this article ecocide, it's not very clear when the ecocide crime was started and when it ended, because this definition of the article, from this definition it's not clear whether there should be already a consequences or the creation of the real threat of causing ecological disaster will be enough to say that the ecocide was committed by the suspect person. So sometimes it's very difficult to qualify the activities as ecocide or other crime. Also in a wartime, it's hard to distinguish the activities which are done by Russian army, whether those activities affecting the environment, whether the Russian army was committing ecocide or war crimes. Because in our criminal court, we have Article 432. It's also a very popular article nowadays when we talk about investigation during wartime. And this article is named violation of laws and the customs or of the war. So this article talks about cruel treatment with prisoners of war or civil population, expulsion of civil population for forced labor, looting of national values on occupied territory, applications of means of warfare prohibited by international law, or other violations of laws and customs of war foreseen by international agreements acceded by the Parliament of Ukraine, and also giving an order to commit such actions. So it's another popular articles which is applied now in a wartime, and under this article, all the activities of Russian soldiers violating norms of international humanitarian law, which also relate to environment, not only to civil population or other activities. They are also, those activities could be qualified under this article, Article 432. So there is now quite a difficulty for law enforcement bodies doing investigation which article to apply to activities, for instance, like explosion of oil tanks, refineries, or explosion at explosion at Kakhovka Dam, which I will talk a little bit later. So there are some difficulties for qualification of such activities, whether we should qualify them as the ecocide or as a war crime. But there are some distinctions between, if we compare the ecocide crime and the war crimes envisaged by our criminal code of Ukraine. As if we have ecocide, the intention of the aggressor or the suspect is focused on destruction of the environment, while when we are talking about war crimes, the intention of the Russian army here is focused mainly on military advantage or close to this goal, but not the environment directly itself in the majority of cases. For instance, if we talk about the explosion and heating of the oil refineries. So here the Russian top officials, they are following the goals of cutting oil supplies to military vehicles which are involved in a war, rather than simply creating a fire that will terribly pollute the air and the environment. Also, in ecocide, the subject of the crime is general, so environment in general, while in the war crimes, there is a special subject of the crime, and usually when we talk about subject, usually it's a person who committed this crime. So in war crimes, it's usually officials or combatants or officials, military officials. They are doing this crime, while we talk about ecocide. So in wartime or in a peacetime, it could be any person committing ecocide. Also, in the definition of the ecocide, there is no reference to the violation of international rules and agreements and customs of international law, while when we talk about the crime of war crime, there is a connection to violation of international rules and agreements and custom as an essence of this crime. So also one of the important distinction between this crime is that the environment is the main victim in the crime of the ecocide, or there is a big risk to environment, but the environment stays the main victim of this crime, while in the war crimes, the destruction of the environment is a collateral victim. So it might be, or it might not be happening. Um, so which are the problems of investigation of ecocide, what we are distinguishing from the side of the general public or NGOs involved in this case, that there are unclear terms which are not facilitating fixation and collection of evidence concerning crimes against environment. Also, we see there is an absence of the necessary laboratory equipment for proper analysis, and at this moment there is a difficulty in distribution of the obligation, who will do the laboratory analysis when some destruction of the environment was happening. Also, another problem is the mining of the territory of Ukraine. Probably you heard that Russian army left mines in the vast territory of Ukraine, in forests, in settlements. So it's really very risky now to come and to collect evidence of the destruction of the environment. Also, a big part of the territory of Ukraine is still occupied by the aggressor, so it's impossible to make calculations of the damage and to collect evidence of destruction of the environment. Sometimes it's also sometimes also very hard to verify the evidence, not only to collect but to make a verification. There is a big problem of absence of baseline data. or for collection and assessment of the evidence, because sometimes the monitoring, environmental monitoring in Ukraine was not happening on a proper level before the war. So now when we have some cases of the destruction of the environment, it's very hard to prove what was before the war started, what level of the pollution was there, what kind of environmental degradation was there, whether it was a clean environment or not. So that's also the problem. There is a problem of coordination of efforts in investigation of crimes against the environment during wartime, and also the difference between direct and indirect evidence of proof, and some difficulties of application of modern technologies like GIS technologies, other technologies in collection, distant technologies of collection of evidence of the destruction of the environment. So with these problems, we have in mind a terrible case of ecocide happened more than 1 year ago in June 2003. There was the Russian army exploded the dam, Kakhovka Dam, and this dam was accumulating 18 square kilometers of water. So it was a huge water reservoir on the Dnieper River, and so this dam was mined and it exploded, and this huge vast amount of water started flooding the settlements down the stream. So near 80 settlements were flooded by the water. There was a huge also huge impact on human settlements, on human health. Lots of people were recorded to be missing or to be killed, and the problem was that one bank of the river was occupied by Russian army, another one was controlled by Ukraine. So on the Ukrainian part of Dnieper River, we were able to do evacuation, to help citizens to evacuate, to save what they have, to evacuate animals, whatever, and to calculate the damage, and to do some other activities, while on the another bank of the river, which was occupied by Russian, it was impossible to help people there, and we don't have exact information what kind of damage was happening there due to flooding after the explosion. So this vast amount of water of Dnieper River, it reached Black Sea and created very negative and vast widespread consequences on the environment, and also on many economic activities in Ukraine, as there was a effect of domino, because there was a massive loss of underground water resources during this and after this flooding. Water balance was undermined, and there is now a huge risk for drinking water supplies downstreams, as this dam was constructed more than, I think, 60 years ago. So water supplies, irrigation, and many other activities very much connected with this Kakhovka Dam and this huge water reservoir. So after the explosion, those connections were disrupted, and lots of losses were happening. Lots of birds lost their nesting areas, and this affected colonies of waterfowls and migratory species. There was a threat to migratory routes as well. And also this water of Dnieper River, it accumulated radionuclides in the sediments, as after the big disaster at Chernobyl nuclear power plant that happened in 1986, almost almost 40 years ago, maybe a little bit less. So this river, Dnieper River sediment, they accumulated those radionuclides after the nuclear disaster, which resulted in pollution of the air and waters. And now, so this water with polluted sediments, polluted with radionuclides, it went downstreams to the Black Sea. So the nuclear pollution, radiological pollution is there, and we have to detect it and to see what level of pollution it is. So on this slide, you can see that huge territories and huge territories where economic activity was taking place were flooded. Or, for instance, agriculture facilities, oil tanks, oil gas stations were also flooded. The animals were very much affected because they were left without food, and there were lots of teams rescuing and trying to rescue animals from flooded areas. So it was really lots of effect on the nature, and on the nature as well. You can see, yes, just a few pictures to illustrate how miserable was were the settlements, and the local and like pets, domestic animals and pets were also very much affected by this. So there were some measurements taking there were some measurements taking place in the Black Sea and in Dnipro River during the disaster, and those measurements indicated high concentration of oils in the water, toxic metals, pesticides, PCBs, and many other hazardous substances, because, as I mentioned, the cemeteries were flooded, pesticide storage places were flooded, waste landfill sites were flooded, oil stations, cattle cemeteries were flooded, and also there was a huge lot lost in the population of fish resources, you can see. And because this was happening in summer, so there was the spread of the results of animals bodies were also being destructed in the water, and this was spreading the pollution in the water as well. Also, you can see that some even like fridges and other machines also was found in waters, and leakage were also very much possible. So this resulted in the terrible consequences to water resources, and there were really very limited possibilities to take samples of the water, because on the Dnieper River it was very unsafely to be on the bank of the river and to make especially downstreams of the Kakhovka Dam, and to take sample because of the shelling, as the Russian army was occupying the opposite bank of the Dnieper River. So as soon as they have seen somebody, or drones have detected somebody on the bank, so they started shooting at, and it was really very, and it's still really very dangerous to be on the bank river. So the collection of the evidence of this ecocide, of this catastrophe, is very much problematic. The same situation with the Black Sea, as probably you know that the Black Sea is mined. There are huge mines floating in the Black Sea, and the coastal areas of the Black Sea are banned for allocation of the population. It's not safe there, so that's why it's very difficult to collect and sailing in the sea is also impossible for researchers because of the mines floating in the Black Sea. So it's very hard to collect evidence of this disaster and its effect on the water resources. There was also a big, there is still a big effect on the fertile soils in the south of Ukraine, as south of Ukraine is known for growing lots of vegetables, like half of the vegetables of Ukraine, fruits and vegetables were grown in the south of Ukraine. And south farmers from the south, they used water for water from irrigation system, which were also dependent on the Dnieper River. And because of this explosion, so 31 water irrigation system in three oblasts, in three districts of Ukraine, was destroyed. So it means that farming is also almost impossible without irrigation in this very dry area of Ukraine. So 500,000 of hectares of lands were left without irrigation after the explosion. So there are also there are the different data, but some of the data say that 10,000 of hectares of lands, fertile lands, which were used by farmers, were covered by river sediments, which means that those river sediments, sometimes they, as I mentioned, contain radionuclides. They contain the remnants of oils, of pesticides, of PCBs, and many other substances. So now cultivating of fruits and vegetables on those polluted agricultural land might be really very dangerous and unsafe. So we still have to find out this, to make proper analysis of the soil, whether it's still possible to use the soil in agriculture. To come to the conclusion, it's necessary to say that the ecocide cases happening during wartime, for instance, the Kakhovka Dam destruction case, should be investigated at the national level. And also on the international level, we want to bring this case further to the competence of the International Criminal Court and maybe other institutions that will be created to consider the war and the case of the aggression of Russia Federation. So the damage to the environment should be investigated, and at the national and the international level. And the Russian military top officials should be made responsible for the destruction of the environment in Ukraine nationally. At the national level, using national courts, and globally, we also believe they should be taken to responsibility globally as well. Prosecution of ecocide on the national level is quite complicated, and Maxim will mention more about those complications due to many reasons. Uh, um, there are lots of challenges now at the moment on prosecution of the war crimes related to the destruction of the environment, as what we have seen during this last 2 years. There is not much focus on the international level in investigation of environment related damage. There are cases of investigation of crimes against humankind, against ordinary people, but not about the environment, destruction of the environment. So we want to bring this issue more higher to the agenda of the International Criminal Court and other institutions that will be tasked with this task, further to investigate the damage done to environment and to bring aggressor to responsibility. And also what we are noticing, that the war in Ukraine gave impetus for reconsideration of international legal instrument of responsibility for violation of international law and international customs, as we are witnessing that sometimes international, and even in our cases, international law is not very effective. International law is not very effective, and we cannot stop destruction of the environment at the moment. And at the moment, there are not many bodies that are eager or mandated with the task to investigate the destruction of the environment at the international level. That's why we think that our case of war in Ukraine should pave the way for better law enforcement at the international level. And we have to watch what kind of international avenues will be created and will be available further, because we have to show other aggressors like Putin that initiating war is a very expensive venture, and every person who will initiate war like Putin will be taking to responsibility on the international level as well. So thank you for your attention, and I am open to questions, or maybe after Maxim's presentation, or we can start a discussion, and we would be happy to hear your opinion, what you think, how we can take Russian aggressor to responsibility for what they have done, what they have been doing in Ukraine.
Should we, thank you so much, Olia. Should we proceed with your presentation, Maxim? Or
Dear Professor Paolo, it depends on the audience. If audience already has any questions to Ola, I assume there is a sense to provide such possibility. If not, if the students are not ready yet, I can proceed with the presentation, and then we can go to the Q&A session.
Okay.
It's up to you. You are the host. You decide, please.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask, the focus of the presentation was mainly in individual criminal responsibility of individual. Are there other instruments to call for state responsibility, like Russia, the state itself, to compensate the damages caused, the environmental harm caused by the war? And if so, in which instances the International Court of Justice or other tribunals? Thank you.
Yes, I think we are still investigating the possible avenue for taking Russia to responsibility. We had been analyzing the case law of International Criminal Court, of other courts created under UN system, and there is not much avenue to bring Russia to responsibility for violation of the environmental norms or destruction of the environment per se. There were not very many, just very few, I think, cases, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and maybe two more cases related to the destruction of the environment during some hostilities. And those cases, it was really very difficult to prove the destruction of the environment, and the judges were really very much focused on the evidence, and the compensation awarded to other countries was really quite tiny. So we don't see very much perspective in applying to those courts, but there is a perspective of creating special tribunal for this case. So let's see what will be the mandate of this tribunal, and whether we will be able to bring the issue of the destruction of the environment also to the competence or to the mandate of this tribunal. There is also a possibility, we are talking about this, the possibility of creation of special compensation commission, which will be tasked with compensation of damage done to environment, as we are taking the model of the compensation commission created started almost 30 years ago after the invasion of Iraq into Kuwait. Probably you know about this case, or you will learn this case too. So this is very good example of the mechanism of receiving compensation from the country aggressor. But Ukrainian case is very different. There is a problem with the seating of the Russia in Security Council of the UN, so it's impossible to receive a necessary resolution from the Security Council initiating or launching a special body like compensation commission or other mechanism for compensation or taking Russia to accountability. So Ukraine with international partners all around the world, I think we are working on different avenues how to take Russia, the country, to responsibility for what they have been doing in Ukraine.
Thank you, Professor Olya Zambrana. Can we now proceed? Maxim Popov, please.
Yes, sure. We can proceed. Hello, everyone. It's a big honor for me, and thank you for the invitation to the University of São Paulo to be a lecturer today and to share with you the information about the efforts, Ukrainian efforts to put to the end the impunity for the wartime environmental damage caused by the international armed conflict. Before I start my presentation, I would kindly ask probably Professor Paolo, if possible, to turn on the short movie that was sent you today. Could you please confirm if you have it and if you can turn it on? There should be a sound.
Of anywhere affects it everywhere. Before Russia's aggression, this impact has been largely sidelined as collateral damage. This must change. Russia uses the destruction of the environment as a weapon of war. The consequences are devastating, widespread and long-term. The air has been polluted by over 10 million tons of combustion products. Cultural land has been rendered unusable. The aggressor targets nuclear objects. The destruction of the Kakhovka Dam is the largest man-made disaster in Europe since Chernobyl. And it's only one of 92 attacks on British infrastructure objects documented in the report. The challenges are global. We must stand united to overcome them. Ukraine is the first country to prosecute environmental war crimes and ecocide. International experts are working side by side with Ukrainian investigators. Our goal is to set a precedent. Protect the environment. For the people of Ukraine. For the people of the earth. The world must learn to work together, or finally it will not work at all.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we could watch it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great job, Mr. Professor. Can you see my screen that I shared before? with the presentation? Okay, super. As you may know from this movie, which we created trying to explain what is going on right now in Ukraine with the environment, Ukraine intends to set a precedent of the individual criminal responsibility for the wartime environmental damage. The reason why is that we already facing full-scale invasion of Russia Federation against Ukraine this third year, and almost 10 years the part of our territory is under the occupation of Russia Federation. It is really simple fact, but it was not recognized some time ago that environmental damage resulting from armed conflicts can be multifaceted, severe, long-lasting, and mostly irreversible. It not only harms natural habitats and ecosystems, but can also affect human health well beyond the conflict area and long after the conflict is over. The human rights to life and to a healthy environment are thus undermined. That is the part of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe resolution dated 2023, just 1 year ago. And before this year, probably 1 year before, it was passed by the UN General Assembly resolution, the principles of the protection of the environment during armed conflict. That was probably the beginning of the rethinking and the transformation of the mindset of international community toward the environment that suffers from any armed conflict that are happening on our planet right now. Here are some facts. Some of them you already saw. So at the moment, the quarter of the territory of Ukraine, that is the biggest country in Europe, by the way, is contaminated with the landmines. Under the threat of destruction, 17 Ramsar sites that are protected by the Ramsar Convention, and Brazil is also, by the way, is the member state to this convention. This convention is about the protection of the wetlands. 160 Emerald Network sites are under threat of the destruction. Under occupation right now, 10 national parks, 8 nature reserves, and 2 biosphere reserves as well. Sometimes it's quite difficult and challenging for us to collect evidence on the harm that is happening on the occupied territory. And of course, it's more easy when the territory is not occupied or de-occupied as a result of our counteroffensive. You may saw already some numbers. Here are, again, key facts and key consequences of the destruction by Russian of the Kakhovka Dam. It has happened on the 6th of June 2023, and at night, Russian military blew up the dam from the inside by the explosion materials. The Kakhovka Reservoir was the biggest one in Europe, and as a result, there is a damage downstream and upstream from the dam. The flooded area reached 610 square kilometers. More than 80 settlements were flooded. 35 people, as up to now documented, died due to the flooding. And of course, among the consequences, there is a severe and long-term impact on the ecosystems that was already mentioned by Ola. At the very same day, Prosecutor General started the case of the war crime and ecocide. We created an interagency investigative group composed of 172 prosecutors from 5 different regions, and also created the biggest investigative team to collect the evidence of this huge disaster. At the very same day, the Prosecutor General sent the information notice to the International Criminal Court, informing them about this cruel war crime and letting them know that Ukraine is ready to share all the evidence that will be collected within this case. In a few days after the 6th of June, on the 11th of June, the Prosecutor General visited the Kherson region, which was mostly affected by the flooding, with the representatives of the International Criminal Court, to let them see by their own eyes the consequences of this international crime. The philosophy, our philosophy of the Prosecutor General Office and the law enforcement agency right now in Ukraine is, you can see on the screen. Before the full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine, if you would make any research about the environment and the armed conflict, you may find that environment usually was treated as a silent victim of war, and we decided to change that. So there is a motto that environment should no longer be the silent victim of war. And we started this initiative in 2022 after this quite famous word of the Prosecutor General Andriy Kostin. As up to now, we opened 209 cases on the war crime that resulted in damage to the environment. Among them, 14 cases with the preliminary legal qualification of ecocide. You already heard from Oля, and I decided to skip it from my presentation, that in Ukraine from 2001, in our criminal domestic code, we have an article that criminalizes ecocide. In order to conduct effectively investigation in these cases, we established a structure that should deal with that. Within the Office of the Prosecutor General, we have specialized Environmental Prosecutor's Office, SEPO. Within SEPO, special unit was created that deals specifically and exclusively with all environmental war crimes only. We are coordinating with our colleagues from different departments responsible for prosecuting international crimes. Also, we have established cooperation with our governmental authorities like the Ministry of the Environmental Protection and State Environmental Inspectorate. Apart from it, there is a huge effort toward ensuring accountability for the wartime environmental damage, not only in Ukraine, but worldwide. The Office of the President of Ukraine created high-level working group on the environmental consequences of the war that was co-chaired by former Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden, Margot Wallström, and the head of the Office of the President, Andriy Yermak. Among the members of this high-level working group was Isabella Teixeira, who used to be the Minister of the Environment in Brazil. As a result of the work of this high-level working group, they actually drafted and prepared the document that with the name Environmental Compact for Ukraine that was presented recently to the President of Ukraine. And this document contains specific and forward-looking recommendations to Ukraine and international community in 3 priority areas. First is documenting damage and reducing risk, wartime environmental damage. The second component is ensuring accountability for the wartime environmental damage. And the third component is ensuring green reconstruction and rebuilding and building the green economy, as well as the reconstruction of damaged environmental sites. Apart from our national efforts, we have quite extensive international support of these efforts. One of the pillars of this support is the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, ACA for Ukraine. It operates through 5 implementing entities, and it was created by the United States, by the European Union, and by the Great Britain. Recently, the special fund was created that gives the possibility to any other states that are willing to support Ukrainian efforts to ensure accountability for wartime environmental damage to be a part of these efforts and to be a part of this work. Apart from it, we have the support of different foreign non-governmental organizations like Climate Council, Justice Rapid Response, and others. Within our office, we created a special interagency working group with the name International Council of Experts. This group is the platform for cooperation with the civil society organizations, and the thematic cluster on combating environmental crimes was established, gathering 25 national and international NGO. Among them, the Environmental People Law that Oля represents here, WWF that is well known in Brazil, Greenpeace, and many other Ukrainian local organizations that helps us in our efforts to collect evidence. So we are gathering from time to time, and we are trying to unite our efforts and share information that we have. For example, Environmental People Law that Oля represents, they are making field missions. They are going to the affected areas. They are making samples. They are collecting samples. They are ordering lab analysis of these samples of the contaminated water and soil, and they are sharing with us this data in order to ensure that this data could be used as evidence in a criminal case. As for the applicable legal framework, at the very beginning, it was really challenging part because frankly speaking, if you will research and check the provisions of international humanitarian law that is applicable during international armed conflict that we have, there are just 2 articles in additional Protocol 1 to Geneva Conventions, Article 35 and Article 55, that actually prohibit to the state party to conduct the actions that may lead to widespread, long-term, and severe impact on the natural environment. And that was the start for us to start understanding and start reconsidering the provisions of IHL and how it could be used in order to build criminal cases. So we have domestic war crime provision, Article 438, and we are also using as a legal avenue the Article 441 of Criminal Code of Ukraine that prescribes criminal responsibility for ecocide. You may see again at the bottom of this slide the definition of the ecocide that we have at the moment in our domestic criminal code. I will repeat it. It is considered as a mass destruction of flora and fauna, poisoning of air or water resources, and also any other actions that may cause an environmental disaster. As a result of our joint activities with our Ukrainian and international experts, there is a document in place with the name Guide to Identifying and Framing Environmental War Crimes in Ukraine that was prepared by Climate Council and reviewed and agreed upon by Specialized Environmental Prosecutors Office and other organizations and international lawyers. And this document basically structures and outline all possible legal avenues for holding criminally accountable those that guilty for the environmental damage resulted by international armed conflict. There are 3 main categories of the crimes. So the category 1 is when the national environment protected by the rules on targeting. The second category is the national environment protected by the rules on enemy property. And the third category is that natural environment may be also protected by the rules on prohibited weapons. Also conducting investigations in Kakhovka Dam case, we were advised and we decided to try to document possible impact of the destruction of Kakhovka Dam and drained reservoir on the public health of the populations that are living in that area that was affected. So, and we gathered the hair samples of more than 100 children to evaluate and to check if there are any heavy metals in this hair. The lab analysis is on the way, but in order to do it in the proper way, within the standards of child-friendly justice, we designed and prepared the protocol on the best standards and practices in the area of child rights standards and child-sensitive approaches when collecting evidence from and engaging investigations and judicial processes with children affected by environmental crimes. It was prepared by our partners, Justice Rapid Response, and reviewed by specialized environmental prosecutors' offices. So the point here is that our efforts and these structured documents, they may help not only Ukraine to ensure responsibility for the wartime environmental damage resulted by the armed conflict, but it may help any other states suffering from the aggression or non-international armed conflict. As up to now, we have some results. In one case, we issued the notice of suspicion to a Russian colonel general and 4 of his subordinates involved in the shelling of the neutron source research facility and the storage of nuclear materials located on the territory of the Kharkiv Institute of Physics and Technology. This was the first suspicion notice for the crime of ecocide, along with the crime of aggression and the war crime. So here, in terms of actus reus, it was the shelling more than 70 times of the territory of this Kharkiv Institute of Physics and Technology. And this shelling, if it were successful, may lead to the environmental disaster. So I will come back to the slide with the definition of the ecocide, and you can see that any other actions that may cause an environmental disaster is also considered as ecocide in Ukraine and criminalized. Also, within the Kakhovka Dam, the suspicion notice was issued to a Russian colonel general who coordinated the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. This suspicion notice doesn't cover at the moment environmental consequences because the forensic expertise is ongoing, and we are hoping to get the result of this forensic expertise with a comprehensive report on the environmental consequences till the end of this year and proceed with this case. As for the challenges, some of them were announced before by me. So first is the lack of case law related to environmental war crimes in Ukraine before international courts and tribunals, as well in a third state practice. So Ukraine has been a first state undertaking efforts to prosecute environmental war crimes and ecocide. Lack of universal definition of the crime of ecocide on the international level. And as you know, ecocide is not an international crime yet. And of course, it's the complexity of investigation and evidence collection requires high technical capabilities and scientific expertise. And Ola already highlighted these challenges. As for the impact, we believe that our efforts already become the catalyst for the advocacy campaign on the recognition of ecocide as a 5th international crime. We are cooperating with the advocacy campaign Stop Ecocide International with this regard. We tend to set a precedent of individual criminal responsibility for wartime environmental damage, and our work and efforts will become the guide for other states willing to end impunity for the wartime environmental damage. I would also tell you a few words about the impact in place with regard to the criminalizing ecocide as the 5th international crime. Recently, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued the report dedicated to the protection of civilians in armed conflict. It dated 14th of May 2024, and it recognizes that in Ukraine the authorities launched or continued criminal investigations into allegations of war crime. They also began investigating the destruction of Kakhovka Dam and other environmental damage resulting from the conflict as possible ecocide crimes under the Ukrainian Criminal Code. That there are only a handful of states that have criminalized ecocide is a reminder of the need to establish a crime of ecocide at the international level. Advancing accountability for environmental damage in armed conflicts also requires that international and national courts consider more systematically existing international crimes committed by means of or that result in environmental damage. And after that, more than 2 years of really prioritizing this area and allocating a lot of resources towards investigating and prosecuting these cases, I can tell that there is the shift from environment silent victim of war to this new motto: the environment is not a silent victim of war anymore. Thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Maxim Popov, for your presentation. Questions, comments? So this is as an introductory remark before both of you started your presentations. I was commenting with my colleagues and the students that we have short mentions to environmental crimes in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. But as you just said again, ecocide is not yet fully featured as an international crime. On the other hand, it can be no longer neglected as it has been while the Rome Statute was being drafted and received some additional items like the definition of aggression. The further developing ecocide is something that we will have to face in the coming years. And the opportunity you both, Olia and Maxim, provided us today of describing some of the very serious issues ongoing in the totally illegal and abusive war of aggression Russian Federation is waging on Ukraine. So it is very important to have updated and on the site information like both of you could provide us today. So thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. And this is something which Anton Sidorenko and other colleagues from the Ukrainian Institute know that the doors are open for further cooperation and exchange of information and developing initiatives like this presentation. Both of us with Anton Sidorenko provided us today. We are deeply grateful for this very recent update and serious issues that you have brought to our attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Paolo. Thank you so much, your colleagues of the University of São Paulo and dear students. Thank you so much for your attention. Frankly, we really believe that there is the transformation of the mindset and the attitude of human beings to the environment. And I believe and I hope that young generation, which you represent, will really allocate even more efforts toward the protection of environment during and outside of the armed conflict. So thank you for your attention and for the interest to this really important topic.
Yeah, I'm also supporting what was said by Maxim. We are very much happy that in Brazil, which is very far away from Ukraine, and probably you don't feel the consequence of this terrible war, but still you are interested in this topic, and this topic is formulating the new architecture of safety, not only in Europe but in the whole world, and legal professionals, professors from different universities are now engaged in very heated discussions on the changes to the international structures which are safeguarding the peace and security on the whole planet, changes to the conventions, international agreements, even in the environmental field, because 90% of the agreements, conventions, they have no reference to the operation during war times. So we are not very much sure whether they are applicable during war times or whether they are not applicable. So it's a good momentum to reconsider many of the international agreements affecting protecting the environment, for them to be more effective in the future, and to create a possible mechanism of enforcement of those international multinational environmental agreements, as including those in the field of the climate change, as there are lots of discussion that the war is really terribly affecting and accelerating the impact of the global climate due to the loss of the forests in Ukraine, due to the terrible fires and many other consequences of the war. So we think that Brazil should be really heavy load player on the international arena of protecting our climate and fighting against climate change. And reshaping the international legal regime of the environmental protection. So we are very happy that we have now the synergy of academic institutions, public state institutions, law enforcement bodies here. So together we can make an formulate our possible visions for those changes that will that were resulting by this terrible war in Ukraine.
Thank you so much once more, and we hope to have soon another opportunity to hear from you about further developments on this topic. I have been invited to, on the first week of September, to deliver a lecture and make a draft resolution proposal on genocide and armed conflicts. And I have already added an item to my presentation that will be submitted to the plenary meeting of the International Hispanic Portuguese Inter-American Institute of Law, ILADI, on the serious environmental crimes and further developing the concept of ecocide in present international law. So this is something which I do fully agree with you, and I wanted to share with you that I am already involved and committed to working on this topic as well, and this will be part of my presentation on the first week of September in Lisbon, in this ILADI plenary meeting. Thank you so much again, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank you so
much,
much.
and good luck. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.